I'm going to say thank you so much for joining us. And this is Astrid.
Hi.
And she is, I want to ask everyone to actually give her a great big round of applause like this.
Like this?
Yeah.
I thought it would be like the little raise your hand. Yeah.
Thank you. And of course, if you have any questions during this meeting, please write it in the chat or wait until later, write it on a piece of paper or whatever, so you can ask it later. Because I think it's easier if she can actually tell everyone, and then we can do it afterwards. Thank you. So my name is Marie Greco, and I work at Ideon Innovation. And as you can see, I had some technical difficulties today. I'm really sorry about that. You know, when you should do something and you should do it yourself. Yeah, okay. Anyway, doesn't matter. We're here now. Great to see you guys. Like I said, if you have no questions, don't hesitate to ask. But I'm going to actually leave it over to Astrid. And please be mindful that this is recorded. So if you feel like your hair is not on point today, you can always turn off the camera as well.
Yes. Should I just get started then?
Go.
And everyone can see my presentation. Thank you all for joining. And if you have questions, just like write them in the chat. Maybe I will try to read the chat, look at the presentation and all the things at the same time. But maybe I can answer some questions on the fly. My slides are not super interesting because I would like to keep this so it feels like a conversation instead of like long talk. So yeah, my name is Astrid. I'm the CEO of Triple Topping Games. We just turned 5 years old here, 2nd of February. We are based in Copenhagen, Denmark, and my after school job, spare time activity is that I also work as an advisor to Carlo Knights. And today I'm gonna talk about funding and money. And I want it to be a very honest conversation, like what kind of funding did we have in Triple Topping the past 5 years, and how we went about it, and also how to approach the whole conversation about getting money for your next game project or your studio that you are starting. I found when I started out 5 years ago that entering the industry and getting someone to actually give me honest answers was very difficult. I would ask mentors and advisors that I would meet, like how to find money, and people would mention, you can get a publisher. But there was not much information about like how to approach a publisher, what to include in your pitch deck. What kind of money can I ask for? Like what is too little and what is too much, and all of these details. And I think in the beginning that let me feel that there was like no money out there to get because there was so little information about it. But actually there is quite a lot of money, and I think the industry is getting better at having specific programs, and there is more and more funding for indie studios, for startups, for games in general, because it's such a big industry. So with that mindset, I'm gonna talk about money and games as honest as I can, and just feel free to ask any questions. Nothing is like stupid questions at all. Just ask them, and if you want to reach out afterwards and just like have a coffee online to talk about these things, my inbox and DMs are always open. Yes. So a little bit why I talk about funding. Of course, like I run my own studio. I'm also an advisor to Carlo Knights, which is a game fund. So I get a lot of time to look at different game pitches and think about funding and what kind of games and projects I think would be good for us in Carlo Knights to invest in. And I will talk a little bit more about like what a game fund is, and like a little bit about what the terms of Carlo Knight is also later in this talk. And I also talk a lot about funding because, of course, running a studio, I need funding. And I think it's the most fun thing of my best thing of my job. That is actually the business development and finding money for my games. Yes. So I think a good question to ask yourself is actually when you're ready to look for funding, and if you're ready to look for funding. Um, So of course, like you should look for funding when you need money. And typically you need money quite early on when making a game, at least if you want to bring on hires. Um, I would also advise people to get a registered company. Sometimes I get pitches for people who haven't started the company yet. I also see it when advising people here in Denmark, where the public funding scheme is quite big, that people go apply and do this whole process, but don't really have the company ready yet. And it's just delaying the process a lot. And I think there is some good things you need to think about before asking for funding. You need to figure out, what kind of studio am I going to build? How am I going to build this together? Maybe you have some friends you are working on the project with, where what is each of your responsibilities? How are you going to go about shares? Get a lawyer to advise you on these things, because it is really the foundation. And you're going to deal with it for a very long time. It's not only like going online or what you do in your region and register a company. There's a lot of thoughts to think about early on. And having a lawyer help setting up the company can also give you a good like platform and conversation amongst the founders, like, what do we want when we are building a studio? For example, in Triple Topping, us that founded it, Simon and I, we agreed that if we made money, like teaching or consulting work, they would go into the company. So we made sure that we would build something together. Um, and those conversations are very, very interesting to have. So before you look for it, you need to have a registered company and have these conversations, not only about the game, but also what kind of studio are you founding. Um, it's really good to have a prototype. It's not necessary to have a prototype. Um, if we talk about public funding, and it's a difficult one because it's very different from region to region, but some places, like at least I know in Norway, Norway and Denmark and Creative Europe, which is in the European Union, you don't need to have a prototype. If it's like small amount for Creative Europe, it's even bigger amounts. There you're not allowed to have a prototype. But in general, when we talk about going and get funding for your game, a prototype is just really, really helpful to have, especially if it's the first game you're making and you don't really have a track record as a studio. Then you of course need a pitch deck so you can explain people how you're gonna go about building this game, building your studio, building your team, all of these things. And then you need a realistic budget. And I think this is actually maybe one of the most important things. First of all, figure out like what you want to do with your studio and how you're gonna go about building it. But the realistic budget, it's it's very easy to do the mistake in the beginning of starting out to be too humble and ask for too little. Be worried that no one would fund your game for this or that budget. It is intimidating to ask other people for money. But the thing is that if your budget is too low, it actually also seems as a more risky project, at least in my eyes. Because if people are not paid a living standard, so they can afford rent, they can afford daycare for the children, go to the gym, all of these things we need to live, then the risk of those team members leaving your studio to go work for somewhere else is pretty high. And then they would also take all the knowledge and skill out of your company. So I think a realistic budget is it's very, very important. And I will talk a little bit more about budget and what to expect when pitching your budget a little bit later on. Um, so yeah, there is this feeling that there are no money around, especially when you're starting out and no one is really telling you anything. Or they say like find a publisher, oh maybe get an angel investor. But there is money, and this is where you can find them. And this is also what I'm gonna cover this talk. So first thing, um, if you're starting your studio just now, saving it's a starting point, and I think it's good to have savings, or you could maybe even say stamina. Talk about amongst the founders, like how long can we live without getting funding? Like when will it become critical? When can we no longer pay rent? What if there's someone on the team that has a family? How are we gonna make sure that they can sustain the family life? Um, so savings will get you somewhere, and it is definitely a big factor in the beginning, but it will not get you very far, because having savings would maybe just cover for yourself, not taking out a salary in the beginning, but very soon you will have to pay for Unity license, or Adobe license, or an office space, and there's so many licenses you would have to pay for. Or you will need to bring on freelancers, and that's hard to do in savings. So angel investment, uh, it's a possible thing. I know most people, I guess, on this call here are from Sweden, and there are more angel investors with a game focus in Sweden, and I do think it's possible, but it can be complicated, and it's always smaller amounts. Games are expensive to make, and bringing on angel investors where it's like small amount, let's just say 250,000 US dollars. I know it sounds like a lot, but in a game, making a game, it's actually quite small. So maybe an angel investor will only be able to bring in 50 of those, and they want shares in your company, and there's a lot of due diligence around the whole equity. So in the beginning, it can also end up taking a lot of time from from you as founders on figuring these things out. Um, what is a good deal? How to set it all up? You will also have to pay for lawyers, back and forth on terms, and so on. Um, so I think it's definitely possible to do, but you need to think about what is the angel investor. I will also talk a little bit more like what are they bringing to the table more than money. Do you understand the process of giving shares and equity of your company as well? There's like AA investment, so it could be like a bigger seed investment, or like tipping towards a VC round. If you're ready for this, I think this talk is not for you, because I'm just gonna be very basic in this one. And if you're ready for like, I would say more than one to two, 3, 4 million US dollars, there's probably talks covering that better than this one. This is the very basic of talking about money. And then there's always this saying like friends, family, and fools. And I know it's always hard to advise like when to not take money, because I know living in Scandinavia, we are quite privileged here. In other places, you don't have access to incubators, angel investors, public funding, and it can maybe be the only option that you have to get someone from your family or extended family to help you fund your company. But I would say mixing family and friendship and business is just, it's never a healthy strategy in the long run, because starting a studio, you will have so many ups and downs, and it will take time before you can take out profit from the company. It can take a long time before there's even an exit. uh Money from family are very often like money that is very dear to them, that they can maybe not afford losing. They just want to help you out. So for them, it's way more risky, and you can end up in a lot of like uncomfortable situations. Having family sort of mixed up in your company, and they are not understanding the games industry. They are not understanding necessarily like what kind of game you're building, what kind of deals that is out there, but they care very much about the money that they put into your company. Um, we took money in the beginning from family, and it's okay, and it's like nice and friendly. But I would definitely say, looking back, that I would rather not have a family member that would have to like look and because they have equity, so they also need to sign off papers and like sharing everything I'm doing in my business and explaining it to someone that is not even working in games. Um, so if you have other options, I would definitely advise you to do that. So now I talked a little bit like, oh, don't take these money, but then like, what kind of money? um, there's a publisher. You can go to publishers. There's platforms. I think this is something we don't talk too much about. Maybe it's because it's often a little bit more experienced studios, but there are programs both with Xbox and Sony's that can fit people working on the first or the second game, and you can actually get funding from platforms like Xbox, Sony. Netflix is also entering the industry. So like a game fund, like Count Knights, there's also Astor Fund. There's maybe people have heard about the Wings Fund. Um, Bright Gambit bid is from quite a few people from Sweden. So there are different kinds of funds out there that you can approach. Moonrise Fund as well, but I think it's only for America still. Then there's of course like Kickstarter or crowdfunding, and then there is also public funding, but I'm leaving it out because it's it's not all places that have that access. So if you have that, go for it in your region. So talking about the publisher, first of all, I think if this is your first studio, um, a publisher is how to say it? There's a lot of discussion online, like a publisher's evil, are they just gonna take your money, what is a fair business model, what is a good publishing deal, when are they taking too much, um, and I think in the beginning, starting out, and when it's your first game, you will, even though if it's not the best publishing deal, you will learn a lot from going through the whole process of like signing a deal with a publisher, going through the whole release, getting your game out there. Um, and of course, there can be publishing deals that you will regret later on, and you think like I could have done this better on my own. But it can also be a good way of learning together with people who are very experienced in the whole marketing and release and porting and QA and best practice of localization and all of these things, and you will have someone to ask these questions. Um, so I think it's definitely something you should look towards if it's your first game that you are releasing. So what you need to go to a publisher, you will need a good pitch. And this was not when I started out, but Raw Fury has a very nice template that you could use. Um, that sort of like walks you through the different steps of what you want to include, but also make it your own. Usually when preparing a pitch deck, both if it's like for a publisher, investment, a game fund, even a platform, I have like a short version of a deck, and then I have a more detailed deck. So the short version is good, especially like if any of you are going to TDC and are booking your first meeting, you can include that one, and people can get an idea of like what is it that you're building and what are your goals, and then you can bring a longer deck, or if there is a follow-up conversation, you can share a longer deck where you go into more details and add way more informations about what you're doing, not only with your game but also what kind of studio you're building. Like even though a publisher is on the game and the project, it's still interesting to know where you see your studio going in the future, because of course people are interested in making long-term partnerships and relationships when entering into a business together. Having a PC build, if it's a mobile game, like of course, like having an Android build or test flight or something like that, but a PC build with like nice and clear instructions. I like when people are pitching us in Counter Nights if they have a video as well. Um, we see a lot of games each week. All publishers and funds are doing that, and there's always more than one person if made through the first step, usually looking at the games, and not everyone would have time to play it before an evaluation meeting, for example. So there a video can be helpful. So you can at least get an idea of it before you talk with the rest of your team. And then a realistic budget for development. And yeah, maybe I will say this is on another slide. Okay, I will just tell what to include in the budget. So if it's a publisher, there are some things that you would need to include, but there's also some things that the publisher would take care of, but you can still have an estimate of it. But what you need to include in your budget is office and licenses. I see a lot of developers starting out, they forget they have salaries, but let me know if it's a remote studio, but still there will be like office expenses, like computers, Adobe license, Unity license, Wise if you're using that. All of these things, remember to include it. Have a post-release window. I think you can also include 3 to 4 months. It will take a little bit before the money is coming in, and if you need some team members at least to stay on to like bug fixing, maintaining, maybe work on a DLC, you have to include that as well. And just make it visible when you are pitching, so the publisher can see like what is going to salaries before and after release, and the same goes for office. Vacation, pension, hot dogs, like if you pay lunch at the office, it could be like teams activities. We have a small budget for that in triple topping. It's about $500 per month. Yeah, $500 per month. So it's not much, but it's an important thing of making our games that we can sometimes do activities together. So you will need to include that as well. Like think of all the expenses you have when making the budget. Vacation I'm including because it's also very different from region to region. But I definitely see some budgets where it's, and that's also with time planning, where the developers forget that people will need to have vacation each year. And that's of course like influencing like how much money you spend, but also how like what is the timeline of release. If everyone is like off work in July, you are not working on the game there, but you probably still have to pay a salary, at least in Scandinavia. Legal fees. I know Raw Fury actually have some money going towards the contract review, but not all publishers has that. So legal fees is important to include as well. You will need someone not only for the publisher contract, but also for other deals that you're gonna make, maybe together with the publisher. Um, you will also need to have a lawyer to go over your employee contracts and contractor contracts. And there's a lot of you, you spend a lot of money on lawyers when you have a studio. So remember to include those as well. And then I included this, like what a publisher say versus what they actually say, because I think when I started out, I had a lot of these. You get the feedback from the publisher, and I think I misunderstood it a lot of the time. And I also think that game funds like Carlo Knights and Publish could be better at thinking about how what we are saying is perceived by a developer, especially if it's someone starting out in the industry. Um, so, for example, a publisher can say, this game is too expensive. And actually what they often mean is not that it's that you should like go and pay everybody 50% of a normal salary in your region, and not take any salary out yourself, and just crunch and not eat for 3 years. Actually what they mean is that it's too expensive. It could be that it's too expensive for the budget. So that of course, like publishers have different ranges of how much they can put into a game. I just saw your hand talking about Raw Fury all the time, but they're so open, so it's easy to talk about what they're doing. I just saw your hand from Raw Fury tweeting today that they go from 100 US dollars, 100k US dollars up to 8 million when they are funding. So you know, if you have a very big game, you can go to Raw Fury. If you have a very small game, you can go to Raw Fury. I know Fellow Traveler are around 200k US dollars. And it's okay to ask before you pitch what the budget range are, so you don't end up pitching someone who cannot afford your game. The other thing that can mean is that it's too expensive for the return on investment, so that they see the market as being too small for the cost of your game. So, for example, in triple topping, we are making narrative games. That's a tough sell. Narrative games are not making that much money, and everyone is putting Oxenfree in the pitch deck. But Oxenfree is not a good example. It's a long time since released. It was actually not doing very well in the beginning before they had some new platform releases. The same goes for Night in the Woods. That was like very, very popular, but it was that one game that made it really big. So narrative games in general are really hard to sell, especially on Steam. And there it can just be that because narrative games, you often have beautiful animation that is just too expensive, and they're not sure that they're recouping their money, and actually also making a good profit on the game. So if a publisher says it's too expensive, it's okay to ask a follow-up question and be like, hey, is it because of your budget range or is it because of the market? Because then you're also learning something and getting more out of that feedback. And you can go and look, okay, do I need to explain better what my business strategy is? Do I need to look at my whole concept if there is actually a market for it? Is there another way that I can like show to the publisher that there is a market for this? Um, Often you also get these emails like, "Hey, keep me posted, keep me in the loop," um, which is such a weird thing. It's like, yeah, so are we in conversation here or are we not? They're so Dutch sometimes. And I also said keep me posted to developers pitching us. Um, what I mean when I say it is, and I try to put a little bit more words on it, and I think people should explain better what they're saying. But if I say keep me posted, it could be that I'm saying like, hey, right now this project is a little bit risky, but you said that you are also asking for public funding in your region. Could you give me an update when you know if that's going through? Because then I would be willing to take a look again. Um, Maybe people are working on having a demo ready for the Steam Next Fest, which is online right now, and it could be good for me to just see like what is the first feedback from the audience, to have an understanding if there is an ask for this genre. So sometimes it's just like I generally like this project, um, or that I like you, but I'm not sure about the game. So it's like you keep some developers and some projects and some teams in the back of your head, and it can also be that they are thinking, if we have like one slot opening later this year, like often publishers have like producers and teams. You cannot release like hundreds of games at the time. You have like certain amount of games you can release this year, and you just want to see like, maybe it's gonna be this other games. We need a little bit more time to evaluate. It can also be that you're a very big fan of the developer, but you're not really sure this is the right project, and you just want to make sure that they keep updating you of what they're doing. Yeah, get traction before signing. Uh, Sometimes you would also get a very long list of feedback that you didn't ask for. Um, and I know this can be controversial, but I actually see this a little bit of a red flag if a publisher is writing you like this big page of feedback. Um, of course, if you've been in a close conversation for a long time and you have been back and forth, it could maybe make sense. But when I'm like passing games, I usually ask if people actually want the feedback. On ask for feedback, you never know where it lands actually. And I sometimes get the feeling that someone would try to get you to make a specific product for them. And I believe that developers know best what the game is and what they're good at making. Um, so if you get a long list of feedback and it's the publisher not there to sign your game, like don't go and change your whole concept. Relax, pitch it to someone else. Because maybe they're just not looking for your kind of project and they're trying to fit you into a box that you're just simply not fitting into. Um, And yeah, it has this feeling of like, I'm better at making games than you are. It's like, then go make them. um, so what to expect from a publishing deal? So of course, there's no free money. Oh, public funding can be free money. You will just have to do like some due diligence or like of accounting and showing that you're actually doing what you promised them. But other than that, there's no free money. If it's equity, it's not free. An investor would like to see an exit at some day and making a profit of their investment. The same goes for a publisher. The same goes for a bank. The same goes for a game fund. And the first thing you would often see is like, what is the strategy of the publisher recouping? And this is where you need to pay attention, because I have seen deals where the publisher is recouping on their revenue share. That makes it takes a very long time before they're recouped. It can also be that it's a 100% recoup. So let's say a publisher put in 500,000 US dollars into your project, and it's a 100% recoup. Then your project will need to make 500,000 US dollars before you would see your revenue share of those money that the publisher invested, because the money goes from the publisher to the developers. You will actually have to write an invoice to get your share of the game that you made. So if it's a 100% recoup, it can take a long time before you see any money, and that's also why it's important to include a little bit of post-release project. So it's not like release on Steam and then like bye, closing the office, turning off the the computers and everything. Um, so look at the recoup and ask what the strategy is for this. Um, Ask a publisher to have marketing localization, QA, and these costs that is often not covered by salaries in the studio, included in the contract or estimated, or have a plan for how it is. So you don't end up in a situation where it's suddenly, we double the marketing budget, because that's also going into recoup. So if development was 500,000 US dollars, then they may be adding 100,000 US dollars on marketing, and there is 50,000 on porting, and then there's 45,000 on localization. And the marketing, they can maybe go up and down. And you will need to have an understanding of how are the terms around this to know when you would actually start seeing money and not end up owing them money. So that's also where to pay attention. Yeah, I talked about this, like if it's a 100% group. Another thing that is important is that a publisher have milestones and deliveries, and that's important when looking into your cash flow at your company. So, and I see people definitely making this mistake of over promising milestones deliveries, making them so detailed that it's like super hard to know if they're even fulfilled. Because if you ask, let's just say you ask for 500,000 US dollars going to your like salaries and all of these things, and then there is milestones, and there is not like a big window there for iterations and so on. You can end up in a situation where you would have to bridge the funding of your studios to get to that milestone where the publisher will pay out the next milestone payment, and that is super stressful, and that's where you end up in crunch, and having to ask your team to just like keep working, because otherwise there's just no salaries. Um, so first of all, having some way of like lowering the risk of having the publishers also have some other money, that's clever. Like if you made a Kickstarter, if you have public funding, if you have an angel investor, that's where you can use it in a smart way. You can maybe also use the publishing money to get startup grants, or you can ask for a credit in your bank. Like make sure you're not ending up in a situation where you would have to crunch your team members to get this milestone, and be reasonable with what you can actually deliver in time. I always add 30% on any time schedule. I try to realistically as possible plan how long time it will make to do this, and then I'm adding 30% on top. Because that's how the build roads in Denmark. They always add 30% on top. And I thought that was very smart. So please do that. And then of course you will need to watch out for like what would be a breach on the contract, and would there be a situation in the contract where the publisher could take over the IP or the development of the IP. For example, if you cannot deliver a specific milestone. Of course, like get a lawyer to look at it also. And best would be a lawyer who have worked in the games area, because publishing deals for games are very different than, for example, someone working with music or books or movies and so on. Yeah, ask other developers too what their experiences are with different kinds of deals. Some things to keep in mind when approaching a publisher is that you can look at the portfolio and see if your game fits. A lot of developers are forgetting to do this. Sometimes it can be hard to know, but then ask them. Like, please ask questions to the people you are pitching. They can give valuable information. Like, hey, we wanna have more RPG games in our portfolio, and that's just like valuable for you to know. Any tips of good lawyers? Get recommendations from other studios, I would say. I love my lawyer, Robert. He's a Buddhist and a socialist and super cool. um, so like ask other indie devs who they worked with and what the experience were, and also know that you would maybe sometimes have to change lawyer. So like when we closed investment from NetEase, I used a different lawyer company. My lawyer was honest and said like, convertible notes, safe agreements, I'm just like, this is just not my area of expertise. And then I got someone else. I also use a specific lawyer for all of our employee contracts. So like one lawyer cannot do it all, of course. Um, it's also okay to ask a publisher what the funding range is. It's okay to ask questions in general. If they're slow of getting back and giving an answer, like keep me posted forever, I would see it as a red flag. If people are interested in your game, they will sign your game because they don't want somebody else to sign it. Like if I'm very interested in a game in Call of Knights, I will make sure that we get it, of course, and then it can take like 2 to 3 weeks from I receive the pitch until they sign it. If people, of course, like our contract and deal structure. And it should feel like an equal partnership. Don't don't let anybody belittle you or like take over what you are doing in how you're running your studio and making your game. Um, the publisher would not be there if there were not developers making great games. So it is an equal partnership, and you should really treat it like that as well. It's better to be honest. It's better to ask stupid questions and clarifications. All of these things, just like see it as an equal partnership, even though if it's your first game that you're signing. Yes, get a lawyer. Get a lawyer. It's very important. Okay. I can see we are short on time. There's so much. So I'll maybe just go a little bit faster over platform deals. But I think it's something that is like overlooked when talking about funding. Also maybe because like just going 2 or 3 years back, it would be way easier if you had a publisher on board. But there are more and more initiatives where it's getting easier to get funding. Also, even though it's your first game and if you're approaching them on your own. So like going to a publisher, you need the good pitch. You need a PC build. You need a video. Budget? Yes, you need a budget, but don't necessarily need to include a budget breakdown in your pitch deck that you would have to do if you were approaching a publisher. Because publishing platform deals are a little bit different. They are basically paying you to go on their platform, do the porting, work with them, and having the game there. Um, So it's not necessarily what you spend. It can be that the platform money are going, it could go towards your profit if your game is profitable and it was funded together with a publisher, but it can, of course, you can also use it for the development or as a part of the development. I've done that in Triple Topic, combined platform deals and public funding and game fund and whatnot in the whole process of finding all the money. So there's always new platform deals. And again, don't be afraid to ask people. Like, ask other people who are developing games. Like, hey, I heard about Netflix. What's going on there? And everybody's on an NDA, but just get a feeling for what's going on. Book meetings and get to understand what they're working on. So of course, it's always okay to ask. If let's say it's the first time with having a meeting with Liz from Sony, and you could ask like, hey, what kind of support do Sony actually have for developers and developers like me, and explain your studio and where you're at. Because then they will let you know, and you will have a better understanding of what do you need when you are pitching them and approaching them. Maybe they have some specific things they're looking for. Just book a meeting with them, and ask these questions. It's totally fair and fine to do. No one would think like, oh, how unexperienced you are. I was so afraid to ask these questions in the beginning, but just ask them. It's like, what do I have to deliver? For example, if let's say it was Sony, what is the deal structure? Like, are they recouping on the funding? That's some Sony deals that are recouping on the funding. So ask, so you know if this deal is like a good deal for what you are aiming for with your studio, if it's like a good fit, and not just like a super expensive loan, basically, you would have to pay back. Um, I know, I know Sony have some deals where they are recouping also on other platforms, so that's a little bit more like a publishing deal. They're putting money into you making your game, but they will also recoup for what you make on Steam. So that's something to keep in mind. And yeah, it's a partnership. Again, it's you are working together with this platform or this publishers. So as for showcases, streams, demo events, mutual announcements, and so on, be open for working closely together with them, because if you do that right, they will also approach you again for new games in the future. So how do you get in contact with them? Do I call them? Probably not answer the phone, but prefer an email. So if you have a publisher, I think you should let the publisher handle this. But if you really want to learn and grow as a studio, it's totally okay to ask the publisher or the fund if you can be CC'd or kept in the loop of the conversation, so you have an understanding of what is actually the process. And if it's a cool publisher, they would let you do that because there's so much to learn from that. Um, a publisher, a game funder, partner can also scale the deal, because the platform will have more security for that your game is actually getting released, of course. If you're self-publishing and you don't have any contact, you can often book meetings with Xbox or Sony at digital events. So if you have the money and the funds to go to GDC, you can book a meeting. And it can take a little bit more time to sort of get through, because these people have a lot of meetings. And what they usually do is to source all of the games and then go back and show it to the rest of the team. And I know that some game slips in that process. But then you just book them again. And maybe if you end up talking to the same person, just ask a little bit for feedback. Like, hey, let me know if this is not interesting to you. So you get like an honest, like, no, thank you, instead of you thinking that they will come back one day. Like, are you interested in this game? Yes, no, no. Okay, cool. You can move on with that. Um, you can also ask a friend for an intro if someone already have a good contact at the platform. And of course, if they like the game, they will sign the game. If people like your game, they will sign it. Is No one will keep you in a loop for a year and just go around and thinking about signing it. And I think And I misunderstood that a lot in the beginning, that because I had friendly conversation that I felt they were still looking at the game. But if they are not like moving forward, it's not a conversation. It's just like keep me posted thing. So type of deals, if we are looking at Xbox, first of all, there's like exclusivity. So that means that you cannot do like Xbox and Sony and get money, of course, also from both places. And often it says what's like called simship with PC. So you have to like be Steam and Xbox. We did that for Welcome to Earth, for example. Then we waited 3 months because of the exclusivity deal. And then we released on Google Stadia. And then we waited a little bit more and then we could release on other platforms. And it takes a little bit of experience to sort of combine different platform deals. But after your first release, if you are like, if this is the way you want to go about funding your games, you will get a good understanding of what kind of deals work with each other. So there's indie, Xbox Indie at ID Xbox. And that's usually for like smaller projects and indie studios. And I guess that's where people in this talk are. And then there's Xbox Game Pass. Sometimes they can be signed after release. So if a game is doing really good on Steam, of course they think it's interesting to have on their platform too. And also, if it has a lot of potential, you can also close a good Game Pass deal before before the game is released. A publisher is really good at scaling a Game Pass deal as well. I think Game Pass subscription deals is going to like lower in the amount that Xbox pay because the streaming platform, the subscription platform is of Xbox Game Pass is getting so big, especially after acquiring Activision Blizzard. I think it's gonna change these deals, but just like ask other other studios, like what were the amount they got if you are like venturing out to this on your own. Then there's Sony, PlayStation. I would say it's not super indie friendly. Like indie titles are, it's not always the best support, but they are like making some new initiatives lately that I think is interesting. Oh, I forgot to say about Game Pass. If you're pitching for like these subscription services, it's good to include in the pitch like how your game is also offers something different from the audience, because they do have a little bit of money allocated for like diversity, so they want to have a broad range. And of course, like the deal will be smaller, but they are looking for having something unique also to offer the audience. So like think not diversity in terms of team members, but in diversity of your game being something else that is not on the platform that can actually be an argument that you can make. They have indie support now also at Sony. It's smaller budgets, it's same ship, and then they also have diversity funding. I heard up to 200k US dollars, so it's not so much, but it's a very very friendly contract, and there's no sim ship. It's just like basically for porting. And ask again when you talk to them, like what is that fits me in my studio and what I'm doing. Then there are game funds like Counter Knights. There's Wings, there's Counter Knights, there's Aster Fund, there's Moonrise Fund, there's Bright Gambit. There's a lot of things popping up. Simship, that means that you will release on Xbox and PC at the same time. So you are obligated in the contract that you cannot, like if you sign with Xbox, you cannot like first release on Steam and then take like 4 months to do a port and then release on Xbox. They want to be out at the same time as the PC, basically. So what the thing is with funding, there's a lot of funds popping up with very specific focus. So it can be like Astra Fund, I think, is thinking games, like things like Baba Is You, basically, where you have to die slowly over a very hard puzzle. That's the kind of game they're looking for. They have some very cool developers help reviewing the project. Wings Fund and Counter Knights are very similar contracts. But what's important for pitching these, like Wings fund is focusing on female founders. But for for both of us is basically that, of course, we're looking for someone who has a good plan and understanding of how they're gonna release this game on their own. Like in Kowloon Knights, you would have to include in your budget. Yeah, yes, I made a slide for this. How clever was I? In your Kowloon, if you were pitching Kowloon Knights, you would have to include a budget for release that a publisher would normally figure out. So it's like, how much are you going to spend on QA? How much are you going to spend on marketing? And how much are you going to spend on localization? So for marketing, are you going to work with a specific PR agency? Do you have an internal community manager or communication manager? All of these things would have to be included in the budget, and then a good strategy of like how you're gonna go about it. I also like when people are pitching us and they are saying like, "Hey, I think this would work well for Game Pass because this and this and that." Um, so should have a little bit of a better understanding of the whole process of releasing a game. Maybe you released one of two successful titles before, and that's the biggest difference from the publisher. Speaking from Carbon Knight's perspective, I actually don't know about Bings and Astaphant. Also, the money flows through the developer, which is a big change. And there's very rarely a 100% recoup. So it's like, instead of where the publisher collects all the money and you send them an invoice and kindly ask you to give them give you fair share of it, with Carbon Knights, it's the other way around. So I just made welcome to the was signed with Carbon Knights. I just made the quarterly calculation, and I sent that to Carlo Knights, and then they sent me an invoice, and then I wire them their share, and that can be helpful, especially with this like post-release stretching money. Both with a publisher and a game fund, you would share what's coming in from a platform deal. So if you have a game cost deal that goes towards the recoup and the revenue share as well, that's important to keep in mind. Yes. Right, it's not. Okay. Seed investment. I just want to cover this a little bit because in triple topic we had public funding, publisher, game fund, platform deals, and seed investment. We just need crowdfunding. Then I think we have like full circle, whatever you call it. So seed investment or early angel investments is I think it's harder than you think. And I hear a lot of people like starting a company, I want to get an angel investors on board. And I think the angel investment and the seed investment we had in Triple Topping is by far the most due diligence, the most work effort for me that I had to do. So in the beginning, we had one family member in for very few percentages. Then we had the global top round GTR program for 40,000 US dollars. Very, very little. We bought them out a year later. But it was a lot of paperwork. And today we have NetEase. And NetEase from when we agreed that there should be a deal, it still took 11 months to get through the due diligence process and actually get the money wired. And I spent a lot of time on it. And I love working with them as a partner, and I get a lot of good feedback for them, and they open a lot of doors for me. And I'm very happy to work with NetEase. But thinking back on like, I was not at all prepared for the amount of work. Um, so I would say if you're starting a studio, try the publishers first and maybe crowdfunding as well, because it is a completely different beast to invite other people into your company. And if you're taking angel investment, don't look only at the money, also look if this is someone that can open some interesting doors for you. Do they have contact to good publishers? Do they know somebody at Netflix or TikTok or Apple or whatever it is that they can make introductions? Do they know other indie studios? Have they run a studio themselves? Then it's maybe even worth more than the money. And of course,
And
if you
on
take
that note, Astrid, we kind of need to
done.
wrap that up. know
I
we
can
were
talk a lot
realizing
about this.
coming in, but I think a lot of people maybe have other meetings they had to run to. Uh, so
Then send me an email with all the weird questions.
yes. Do you have your email there so we can?
It's Astrid@Kowlow-Knights. I can put it here.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are probably gonna contact you actually because there's a lot of information and like someone asked here before, like what is a sim ship and all these things that you probably should know about, but maybe you don't know.
Yeah. I remember first time I saw it, I was just like, I don't know.
And it's
That's how it is.
important to know.
Yeah. Cool.
And I want to thank everyone for coming, and Astrid especially for doing such a great job presenting.